Hey folks, this is Best in Slot and welcome to the final of these 5 videos we're doing on Prehistoric Planet Season 2, covering the show as it airs throughout the week, focusing on dinosaur design, reviewing the scenes, and talking both about the science on display, a little bit of extra bonus science, and highlighting some of the fun camera trickery along the way. Today in our final episode, we'll be journeying to everybody's favourite biome, North America. I promise I'll stop making jokes about that eventually. Maybe. We begin at the shores of a vast inland sea. This is the Western Interior Seaway, a huge ocean that split North America in twain. I really just wanted to say in twain, and into 2 distinct land masses, Laramidia to the west and Appalachia to the east. Anyway, we're here for the dinosaurs, and our first today is Alamosaurus, yet another titanosaur and the largest dinosaur to roam North America. It steps into view given immense scale thanks to the framing of the rocks and the soaring, beautiful score. They're beautiful themselves, whilst the patterning and coloration is a far cry from the likes of Icysaurus, the sheer scale they evoke, the way the sand shifts out from under them, and the phenomenal texture work really brings them to life. It gives the same emotions as the Brachiosaurus scenes in Jurassic Park. You're in the presence of true, majestic giants here. Odd-looking giants, it must be said. The gurning faces and particularly the teeth look really odd. We haven't ever actually found a skull for the Alamosaurus, so there's some educated guesswork going on here based on other skulls, but those long, rod-like teeth have been found in their presence, and they likely aided with snipping off the leaves from tall trees. We're introduced to an older male, 70 or so years old, and coming to the end of his life. This is the generally accepted lifespan for sauropods, although some likely did live up to say 100 years old. It was once thought they could live for even 200 to 300 years, similar to say a large tortoise, but with their warm-blooded metabolism they'd likely burn out long before then, and smaller dinosaurs would burn out a lot sooner than that. Our male is slowing down too, and his group are leaving him behind. He collapses slowly to the ground, a weighty, exhausted movement as though he's accepted his fate, and with the somber music playing in the background, it's quite effective. We've only known this sauropod for about 30 seconds, but it's genuinely a little affecting when he collapses to the sand. He doesn't survive the night. But, as it always must, death creates new life. These rust-coloured troodontids saunter onto the scene. They're unnamed, of course, like every other bloody troodontid on the planet. there is actually an indeterminate troodontid discovered at the Ojo Alamo dig site in New Mexico, one location where we believe that Alamosaurus and something else upcoming may have crossed paths. It seems a decent bet then that's where we are now, and that's the troodontid we're seeing. Unfortunately for them, they can't get through the thick skin of the Alamosaurus, although based on nature documentaries I've seen with hyenas, they should go through the anus, but who am I to tell them how to live their life? Nobody make any jokes about that one, thank you. Fortunately-ish, for them, somebody else can, and Tyrannosaurus Rex has arrived. In his Hank colours and with the glow of salt spray across his keratin brow, he's looking particularly menacing, and he showcases that menace quickly, lunging at the troodontid, claiming the carcass for himself. Those of you lamenting the lack of gore in this series, which if I'm honest I don't understand the call for whatsoever, things really don't bleed like they do in the movies, will at least be pleased however, because this situation absolutely does call for some viscera as not Hank tears into the carcass. Could be Hank, I guess. He's being a scavenger, and somewhere out there Jack Horner is weeping with joy probably. Of course Rex is an opportunistic hunter, and any intelligent hunter doesn't look a gift sauropod in the mouth. I still love how Rex is animated, the heft each movement carries with it, and you can see why the troodontids are so apprehensive about stealing in to snatch some loose flesh. But they go for it, one of them successfully, and almost toy with the Rex by clambering further up onto the Alamo and staring the Rex down and then doing the same again. Again, this is similar to the Viper versus the Mountain, but it's a nice little dose of personality for the intelligent, playful troodontids. A lull falls over the scene, and then you hear them before you see them. The call of the Quetzalcoatlus. The Rex turns in this really nice shot, gazing up at the sky and the source of the call as Quetzal comes into land. The dull coloration, the sharp flat crest and the wear and tear along the beak give the impression of a pterosaur that means business. There's no mating coloration or anything of the sort here. In the southern territories of the T-Rex, it seems inevitable that these two would come into contact eventually. And a little shout out to the T-Rex sound design here as well. It's throaty and breathy but powerful. Doesn't sound too dissimilar to the sort of calls that modern crocodiles make. At first, it seems as though Rex will be able to stand down the Quetz, but it's not long before a second, possibly a stranger, I don't get the impression they knew each other, flies in to assist. That still isn't enough to quell the Rex, this is a big prize after all, and so we're treated to a great sequence in which the Rex lunges for the pterosaurs who are darting around, up onto the Alamo corpse, and eventually into the skies. This sort of tight, circling attack probably isn't in the Quetz's normal wheelhouse, better suited as an Atstarkid for long-distance, straightforward flight, but their persistence pays off, circling the Rex and stabbing down at him with their long, 6-foot-long, sharp beaks. He's pretty much defenseless against such moves, and though the Quetz don't seem to be causing noticeable damage, it does seem to only be a matter of time. The Rex moves on, and the pterosaurs claim their prize. I'm not sure how likely this sequence is, of course there's some speculation at play here, as I don't believe there's any evidence for Quetz attacks on T-Rex or vice versa. Still, it is an interesting scenario, and the two will inevitably have crossed paths at some point. For segment 2, we are returning once more to the oceans, which I found a little surprising personally, and the introduction of a new mosasaur, Globidens. Globidens is a medium-sized mosasaur, and it's named as such because of the globe-shaped teeth, which, well, you'll see why in just a moment. Globidens itself looks fantastic though, and you can make out some of those rounder teeth as it swims past the camera. It's worth noting that this scene is quite a lot more teal in colour than what you're seeing here. For some reason, my Photoshop is butchering the underwater scenes, but they are a lot more vibrant when live, and the Globidens blends in sublimely with the sort of haze of the ocean. Now for my favourite thing, camera fun. We get this hazy deep sea footage of fish darting back and forth. It's not night vision, you can make out the spherical shape of the torch, lighting them up as they move in front of it, and the ammonites that join them, bursting through the scene with some pretty big velocity, passing by in a gleam of light and then disappearing back into the shadow. It really does feel like a real flashlight being turned onto them. I love this and I want lots more of it. These are Sphenodiscus ammonites, I love that they're still getting named. And given the fact that they have a fully intact wall, I'm going to assume, if I learned anything from the last video, these are homomorphic ammonites. They're shoaling in their thousands, all female, to move to the coast to lay their eggs. I really enjoy their movement animations here, not to mention the extra detailing on their shells, giving them a lot more depth and seeming realism compared to some of those plainer designs we saw last time. They're heading to the coast to lay their eggs, and that's when the Mosasaur likes to strike. I've showcased the Globidens enough at this point, but just one more shot as it flicks its reptilian tongue outwards. Now in modern reptiles, this is done because it gives the animal sensory information. They're able to detect scent particles, chemicals, etc. in the air. In this case, perhaps the Globidens is trying to track down the ammonites using a similar method. Regardless, it's successful and the hunt can begin, soaring forth from the depths to hunt down the ammonites, and this is where that unique globe shape to its teeth can finally come in handy. Those globular teeth are perfectly designed for cracking through protective shells off the ammonites, much like a ball-peen hammer in real life. But the interesting twist here is that the Globidens isn't crunching down and eating the ammonites, but instead letting the air out of them through the cracks in the shell, and that causes them to float down to the bottom of the ocean. That way Globidens is able to keep on hunting and build a huge collection of food items, ready and waiting for when the attack is complete. It's the circle of life, it is what it is, but it's still a little sad seeing these ammonites sink slowly down to the ground, their bodies twirling and cavorting like some macabre ballet as they land with a soft thud on the ocean floor. There's even a close-up shot showing the extending pupil as the life of one of them fades away, and it showcases those circular wounds punched through the shell really well. Violence is the name of the game for this episode, let me tell you. For Globidens though, it's a good day, a veritable feast awaits, and all it must do is tear the fleshy part of the ammonite out from its shell and swallow it down. This shell-crunching behaviour is what's called durophagy, an eating behaviour of animals that consume hard-shelled or exoskeletoned organisms. This often, not always, requires blunter teeth and a strong jaw and bite force. Other mosasaurs were definitely capable of durophagy as well given their strong bites, but Globidens is the specialist. It's not all bad news for the ammonites though. Whilst they've suffered losses, their numbers are so great that there's still plenty of time remaining to make their way to shallow waters where they can finally lay their eggs in relative peace. Each ammonite places a single egg sac, itself containing myriad eggs, and then they skedaddle. It's up to the whim of the gods now. As you can see, however, there's multiple egg sacs together. This communal gathering of egg sacs is also seen in modern animals such as squid, which lay their rod-shaped egg sacs in sturdier groups such as these. I can't find an explanation for why squid do this, but I'm assuming that, like most similar behaviours, it's simply a case of safety in numbers, and perhaps clever utilisation of the best spots on the rock bed. From vibrant life to desolation. At the birth of the Rocky Mountains, placing us over on the west side of North America, a lake has become stranded by the tectonic shifts. It's now cut off from surrounding rivers and the water has stagnated, and as the minerals on the floor dissolve, the water itself becomes more and more toxic. And yet, as is always true, life will find a way. A flock of Stygianetta migrating across the country, well, landmass back then, I suppose, have stopped at the lake. I say Stygianetta, but that's a bit of a loaded statement. These birds are Presbyornithidae, a family of waterfowl with close ties to modern ducks and geese. Stygianetta itself is known from several specimens, including from the renowned Hell Creek dig site, but it hasn't actually been formally classified and described quite yet. I believe that it was named Stygianetta during somebody's thesis, but it'll take future scientific peer-reviewed works to solidify its positioning within history and to formally classify its name. I believe this is the case. Please do correct me if I'm wrong. There's very little information about Stygianetta out there. Anyway, they look fantastic with the soft pink beak, the gently curving down at the tip, those beautifully individualized feathers along its long neck. There's a bit of uncanny valley to them, I think it's the eyes again, but especially in the wider flock, you'd really scarcely believe it's CGI. Of course, as we've seen, nobody in this show is allowed peace, and there's non-avian dinosaurs lurking about. It's Pectinodon, a named Troodon, and that of course means it's a bloody tooth taxon instead. Troodontids, why are you the way you are? The species name is Bakkeri, named after famed paleontologist Robert Bakker, who you may have heard of in relation to his work on Deinonychus, Jurassic Park, but more importantly the revolution of dinosaur metabolism that took place during the 70s and 80s, as people realised dinosaurs were likely warm-blooded. I digress. The juvenile Pectinodons here are adorable, loaded with personality, as they appear one by one behind the rock like they're hosting a skit, before darting off to join their father. He shed his mottled black and white colouring and instead sports rusted feathers, a prominent white mohawk and dashes of crimson upon his wings and underbelly. It's interesting to me actually just how few dinosaurs in this series have any form of counter shading, but when I think about it, it's actually quite rare in modern birds as well. There are birds that have it, but not actually that many. It's much rarer in birds than it is in mammals, or in particular in fish. Regardless, the feathered dinosaurs in the series continue to be really good. These scenes are a lot of fun, with the juveniles darting around joyfully, and even the father seemingly getting in on the action. It says, day out at the beach with dad. And even, just look at the little lad in the bottom left. There's no brain behind those eyes. It's beach day. It's just beach day. They and the Stygianetta are here for a good reason though. And of course, it's food. It's literally always sex or food. As is life. If you're not good with insects, I can imagine these next scenes were a hell for you, because that's a lot of flies. Millions of them, in fact. The toxic minerals of the lake aren't a bother for them, and it turns out their larvae are more than capable of chowing down on it. Now, I'm no expert on flies, but I believe these may be alkali flies, which are found in North America, as they look similar and they've been known to thrive in lakes pretty similar to this one, with no discernible outlets, such as Mono Lake in California. They're actually pretty fascinating little insects, as they've got these waxy hairs on their legs which allows them to create air bubbles, and then they can submerge themselves into lake water and feed on the algae beneath. This may all be totally irrelevant, but I found it interesting nonetheless. In a season chock full of juvenile feathered dinosaurs, these are up there as some of my favourites. We've seen a lot of dromaeosaurids this season, so it's nice to mix it up a little, and these troodontids with their short snouts, huge eyes, and stylish mohawks do feel discernibly different. They're also intelligent. Whilst the first attempts at feeding involve snapping relentlessly at the air, they soon figure out the best way to feed on the flies is to simply scoop them up. Charge forward, mouth agape, and funnel them in. I'm not against eating insects, but no, pass on this, thank you. Good protein though. There's more joyous adventure-esque music here, and I'll stop mentioning it, but the music in Season 2 really has been superb across the board. It's even played for comedic effect as it stops dead when two of these feasting Pectinodons clash into each other mid-air, moments after the Stygianetta conduct to this really funny little Mexican wave with their heads. Anyway, Daddy's hungry and he wants more than flies. I'm not sure I thought I'd ever say those words. He stalks forward, showcasing the full array of beautifully varied feather colourings, and when he sees this moment, he strikes, hurling himself into the air at one of the fleeing birds and clasping around its neck. When back down to the ground, he tosses the bird back and forth before delivering the killer blow, and then delivering the meal to his children, who are no doubt happy to be eating something other than flies. It's nice to see this caring parenthood. We see a huge mix of parenting styles on this show, and I like seeing the dichotomy between the caring and uncaring parent styles. With that done though, we leave the lake and we head to the forest. As we move on, we're still in the Rockies, but they've jutted upwards into cooler air where pine forests can begin to flourish. The camera slowly pans over these misty morning woodlands as guttural bellows rumble out, echoing in the canyons. When we first see the creators, we see them through this movement over the trees, revealing them mid-combat with each other. This makes them feel as though they're living real creatures, not simply posing for our benefit, but instead it's a scenario we've been lucky enough to stumble upon. My beloved Triceratops, my favourite dinosaur, you can blame Alan Grant for that. They look fantastic just as they did in the Swamps episode, and these strings of the music coincide wonderfully with their calls, and the constant sound of bone clashing on bone as off-screen trikes vie for mating attention. That's what they're here for. It's basically a university party where everyone's trying to get laid by showing off. Any minute now, somebody's going to pull out a guitar and play Wonderwall, and for the love of God, please don't be that guy. All the Triceratops look similar on a basic level, but there's some subtle deviations across the head in particular, slight tonal changes in the sunburnt crest, longer, differently shaped horns, tweaked head shapes, and the ink drip patterning on their back even varies. My beloved gremlin baby even makes an appearance. In a series full of theropod juveniles, this little guy still stands out with his misshapen head and his bounding curiosity flowing through his animations. Regardless, between the modelling, animation, sound design, lighting and the rest of it, this is one of the most effective scenes in the series for rendering the dinosaurs believably in the habitat, something I will say North America as an episode does best across the board. I feel, this is speculation, based on some things Attenborough has said as well, like he explained what a Mosasaur was, even though we'd already seen one, or he explained that troodontids are feathered but can't fly, that maybe this was originally the first episode in the series. It has a little bit more of an explanatory feel to it. Anyway, the males clash, their horns sidling in against one another. They're not really trying to stab each other, more so tip the other trike away into the ground. We get these lovely noises of bones slapping together and then crunching as they push and rut for domination. One of the males begins to show off, which, as we know, tends to end badly, and it seems with his undamaged horns and resplendent crest he might do well for himself. Unfortunately, the female is unimpressed. Undamaged horns might look nice, but they actually reflect a lack of experience and character. This is basically the Prehistoric Planet equivalent of the Evel Knievel quote, "Chicks dig scars." I'm not sure if there's a real world equivalent for this. I tried to find it for rhinoceros, which seems like the most likely to me, and let me tell you, whilst I couldn't find it, I now know far too much about the mating habits of rhinoceros. Alas, she's unimpressed. But a new prospect is on the way. An older male approaches, framed blurrily by some dewy ferns. His horns have no such problem, both worn down over decades of wear and tear and, importantly, absolutely bloody gigantic. This appears to be the fabled Yoshi's trike, a Triceratops specimen with gigantic 4-foot-long horn cores, and more interesting still as it seems to represent a intermediary stage between the two Triceratops species, Horridus and Prosus. It's named as such because it was discovered by Yoshi Katsura back in 2010 in Hell Creek. To his credit, the younger male isn't intimidated, and soon the two are engaged in an epic clash, crunching bone, guttural grumbles, dirt and sand kicking up into the air as they tussle and wrestle. This isn't dissimilar to how rhinoceros fight now, lots of pushing and shoving and sideways head movements. The goal really seems to be outright murder your opponent, just establish dominance. You can see the vast difference in size between the two here, not just the horns but through sheer heft of body. The Yoshi's trike is substantially larger. It's thought that dinosaurs, like modern reptiles like crocodiles, likely had indeterminate growth. This is growth that doesn't cease when a determined point is reached, and it enables the organism to continue growing throughout its entire life. That doesn't mean they all end up as giants though, as this growth slows down greatly as age increases, and with crocodiles for example, they may only gain a few kilograms in an entire decade when they hit their later life. Sometimes being big comes in handy, wink wonk, and Yoshi manages to literally lift the forebody, is that a term? Off its rival to the air before slamming them back down to the ground. It's a little dramatic, but given the huge muscular strength that a Triceratops like this would have had around its skull, needed to carry such a massive horn and crest, it's not unlikely. The attack has caused some damage with a slightly gruesome shot of the broken horns of the younger male, but it is a nice opportunity to see the layering in effect here. When you see a Triceratops skeleton, you're just seeing the bone of the horn. Well, usually you're seeing a fake, but you get me. You're seeing the shape and size of the bone. The darker material here that's filled with bloody tissue. The outer layer is a keratinous sheath, so the horns are thicker, longer, and perhaps more elaborate than you might initially believe because that keratin is not preserved. Anyway, the female is impressed, who wouldn't be, and Yoshi can mount her to make little gremlin babies. The uncovered for this episode is talking about the Triceratops segment, but honestly it's near identical to the Pachycephalosaurus one, talking about how the crest was for display in combat, and doing so in basically the exact same manner. We've got this mesh of skin, and we've got some wear and tear. So not much to say on that one. And thus we are done with the pine forests. We're going to finish North America and Prehistoric Planet Season 2 with a trip further north to the Arctic Circle. It's been a cold winter, and the return of the sun has heralded another return. The Ornithomimus from Season 1, with its contrasting grey and crimson feathering, they love crimson in the season, and that slightly ridiculous hairdo. These feathered theropods were found in Colorado, Alberta, Alaska, amongst others. They sprint with impressive speed over the tundra landscape, and we get a brief pause to see one up close, dappled with flecks of snow. This shot does highlight a small problem I've noticed with this entire season though. I suspect it's being done to help the CGI blend in with the environment, but I've noticed that for a vast majority of the dinosaur shots, they're backlit. The light of the sun falls on the side that's facing away from the camera. I take so many screenshots for these videos, I think I've probably taken about 360 or so by now, and I'm seeing it consistently. It's not a big deal or anything, but I do think it obfuscates some of the detail we could be seeing. There are some nice details noticeable here though, as they feed. Of course they've got their jerky, alert, bird-like movements. This is the bird mimic after all, but then there's little touches like puffs of condensation spilling out when they breathe, catching in the cold air. This entire sequence is filled with some great camera and CGI work that ably blends the nearby predator into the backdrop. Nanooksaurus, the polar bear lizard, a tyrannosaurid from Alaska. She, also backlit cough, is as beautiful as she was back in Season 1. Those long, wiry, draping feathers seem a perfect fix for the harsh Alaskan temperatures, and the shifting colours between earthy browns and snowy whites means she can blend in really well into the barren landscape. The way the brow line splits open to cover each eye in ridges and is stuffed full in the middle, shush, with that almost fur-like feathering, she really does feel almost bear-like at times, and she's wonderfully textured to boot. She attempts to chase down the Ornithomimus, but given the open plain they're racing on, she lacks the element of surprise, and these Ornithomimids are just a little too fast for her. She's starving, lacking energy, and she needs her next hunt to be a success. She tracks the herd, and fortunately the next location has a little more cover, allowing heavy snowfall and jagged rocks to conceal her slow, cautious approach. Feet fans get another treat as we get a close-up of hers as she silently approaches. And I haven't really spoken about this at all, but it's worth mentioning the superb job the modelers and animators have done this season with underlying musculature. Any time a body part moves on these dinosaurs, other parts are splaying out and thickening and thinning. The muscle underneath is reacting realistically to the movement. It really grounds the animals in reality, particularly in these close-up shots. She springs the ambush, the chase begins, music ramping up in tempo and volume as she chooses a target and pursues them over the snow. Eventually, as in every horror film since the dawn of time, the target trips over themselves, and that allows the Nanook to move in for the kill, first dragging the body from side to side via the neck before delivering the killer bite, not dissimilar to how the Pectinodon killed the Stygianetto a little bit earlier, and not dissimilar to how Frontier animates dinosaur kills in Evolution 2, to be fair to them. It's a classic technique after all. This kill isn't just for her though, because our fifth baby theropod of the season makes an appearance, eagerly awaiting their dinner as she carries the carcass up a mountaintop to where they've been left behind, hidden from prying eyes. I adore these babies, I always do, but these might be my favourite babies, other than the Triceratops. Instead of the more individual feathers we saw on the Dromaeosaurid and Troodontid juveniles, this time they're covered in this almost downy feathering, and it cloaks more of their body, surely in an effort to keep them warm in such frigid temperatures. Their wavy patterns of gold and yellow are a far cry from the duller tone of their parent, but it really makes them unique in a season inundated with juvenile theropods. They'll need a lot more meals like this if they're going to shed those young colours and grow into capable hunters of their own, but that's a story for another day. With that, we come to the end of Prehistoric Planet Season 2. I'm probably going to do a standalone video going into my thoughts, but I think this season had notable improvements and drawbacks compared to season 1, exemplified really by this very episode, which had a real scarcity of new species. The number of repeats definitely increased towards the end in the final 2 episodes, which is a little disappointing. But my main issue with this season I think has been the lack of absolute standout sequences. There's been some phenomenal ones, don't get me wrong. Beelzebufo stands incredibly strong in my heart, but less of the interesting uniqueness of, say, the troodontid fire scene from last season. A lot of the scenes this season felt a little bit more predictable in the circumstances and in the behaviours displayed. It was a lot of regular hunting and stuff like that. That said, I do think it's a more consistently good season. It didn't have the lows that last season did, particularly with freshwater, but I'm not sure it hit the heights quite as often either. It's more consistent. That said, the animations, animal designs, sound design, music and CGI work have been top notch as always, probably even improved, and there have been noticeable improvements in a few ways. The water effects are much better. I think the variety of framing, the actual shooting and the photography and the camera trickery in this season has been really cool as well. And they've done a much better job with the narration in general. I think just mentioning where we are and particularly what species, what genus we're looking at has been a big improvement for me. It's been a blast either way. I've loved a lot of it, and I'm crossing my fingers we get season 3, even if it's quite a ways away. And I'd like us to go to a different time period. That'd be cool. What was your favourite part of North America, and what was your favourite segment or episode overall? Let me know below. Thank you so much for joining me throughout this entire week. Throw me a like if you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you lovely folks very soon. I'm going to go sleep for many days because these videos take a long time. Cheers, much love, as always. Bye-bye.